Welcome to our Special Needs Corner. We are certainly happy to have you here. Today, we're going to break down something really important, the educational placement options for learners with disabilities, all based on the official guidelines from the Philippine Department of Education. All right, first things first, let's get on the same page with a key term. You're going to hear the acronym LWDs a lot. That stands for Learners with Disabilities. Now, this isn't just jargon. The official definition is super important because it tells us why this all matters. It's about individuals with long-term impairments that, when they come up against different barriers in the world, can really get in the way of them participating fully. You can see how this definition really frames the whole conversation around needing personalized, individual support, right? Now, I want to be crystal clear about where all this information is coming from. Our guide for this whole discussion is DepEd Order number 44 from the series of 2021. And look, this isn't just some recommendation or a helpful hint. This is the policy. It lays out the rules for all the programs and services for LWDs in the K-12 system. So you can be confident that everything we're about to go over is straight from this foundational document. And this right here, this is the heart of the policy. It says the school shall, not should, but shall, provide an appropriate placement. But the real game-changing phrase here is a continuum of services. I want you to really hold on to that idea. It means we're not talking about putting kids into rigid one-size-fits-all boxes. Instead, think of it as a spectrum, a flexible range of support that can be tailored exactly to what each individual student needs. Okay, so here's our game plan. We've touched on the guiding policy. Now we're going to dive into the three main options: full inclusion, partial inclusion, and the self-contained class. And we'll wrap it all up by coming back to that big idea of a continuum of support. All right, kicking things off with option 1, full inclusion. This is what's known as the least restrictive environment. Why? Because it's all about placing the student in a setting that's as close as possible to a typical classroom experience, learning right alongside their peers. So who's the ideal candidate for full inclusion? Well, the policy is very specific. This is for learners who can cope with all, and that's the key word, all, of the required activities in a general education class, as long as they have the right instructional support in place. Think of a student who, with the right tools or a little extra help, can fully participate and keep up with the standard curriculum. But, and this is a huge but, you can't just place a student in a classroom and call it a day. That's not inclusion. The policy demands a whole support system. We're talking about accommodations guided by their Individualized Education Plan, or IEP. It means getting them the right assistive technology. It means making sure teachers and parents are prepared and on board. And, critically, it means real collaboration between the general ed and SPED teachers. The physical space has to be ready too, things like ramps and tactile flooring. And get this, it's mandatory for the receiving teacher to get training in Filipino Sign Language and Braille. That's how serious the commitment is. Okay, moving along our continuum, we land on option 2, partial inclusion. And the name says it all, really. This is a blended approach, kind of the best of both worlds for certain learners. So this option is for learners who are doing great, but maybe not in every single area. They can cope with the majority of what's asked of them in most subjects, but they need a bit more targeted support than full inclusion can offer. And the policy doesn't just leave majority up to interpretation. In fact, it gives us a number. We're talking about a student who can handle between 50 and 75% of the required activities. Having a specific range like this is so helpful because it gives schools a clear objective benchmark to help them make the best possible placement decision. So how does this work day to day? Well, the student spends most of their time right there in the general classroom, learning with all their peers. But for certain periods, they'll go to what's called a resource room. And let's be clear, this isn't a timeout, it's a time in, for focused, one-on-one or small group instruction on those essential adaptive skills they need to work on. And you guessed it, this setup has its own robust support system. The IEP is still the playbook, and that collaboration between teachers is non-negotiable. The FSL and Braille training requirement is still there too, but for partial inclusion, the policy adds another layer of support. In the resource room, there can be additional help like speech therapy, auditory training, or even training in orientation and mobility. It's really about providing that extra specialized support. And that brings us to our third and final placement on the continuum, the self-contained class. This is the most specialized setting, designed for learners who require a much more intensive and focused level of support. This option is specifically and exclusively for learners with what are diagnosed as severe to profound disabilities. This also includes students who might be in a non-graded curriculum or a transition program which just means their learning path is completely customized to their needs and isn't based on typical grade levels. Now, this is where the curriculum itself really shifts. The focus moves away from the standard K-12 subjects and zooms in on what the policy calls adaptive essential skills. What does that mean? Well, we're talking about the real-world stuff: functional literacy and math, daily living skills, social and communication skills, and even pre-vocational training to get them ready for life after school. The policy is also really smart about mapping out a pathway based on age. Kids from 5 to 14 are placed in an elementary school environment. Then from 15 to 24, they're in a secondary school setting. And what happens when they're 25 or older? The school's role then shifts to helping them transition, referring them to other agencies like ALS, DSWD, or TESDA for continued support. Okay, so we've walked through all three options. Let's zoom back out and tie this all together, returning to that really important idea we started with. This is a continuum of support. This little chart really sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? It shows so clearly that there's no one right way. It's all about finding the best fit. You've got full inclusion, where the focus is on participation in the general curriculum. Then there's partial inclusion, that blended model for kids who can cope with about 50 to 75% of activities. And finally, the self-contained class, which zeroes in on functional life skills for learners with the most profound needs. But I have to share one more thing, a really powerful line from the policy itself. Even when talking about the self-contained class, the most separate setting, the order says these learners shall be included and involved in school and community activities to avoid total segregation. Think about that. Even in the most specialized environment, the mandate is still inclusion. The goal is connection, not isolation. And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? The policy gives us the blueprint, the structure, but it's up to every single one of us, the educators, the parents, the community, to build the house. So the question I want to leave you with is this: how can we ensure every single placement, no matter the setting, truly, deeply embodies the spirit of inclusion?